ECOWAS resolves to mitigate political crisis in the Republic of Mali.
Presidential task force gives conditions for reopening of schools under COVID-19 pandemic.
It is not proper for WAEC to then continue to insist on those dates. Therefore, we have requested that WAEC give us and the schools some time to meet up.
The body of Nigeria's first female combat helicopter pilot, Flying Officer Tolulokpe Arotile, laid to rest in Abuja.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss funding models for tertiary institutions.
All right, well, I'm sure we all know that under the Nigerian Constitution as amended, education is on the concurrent list. Of course, that means that both the federal and state governments can exercise their powers over institutions within their various jurisdictions.
Now, education, of course, is one of such matters that both the state and federal governments can indeed exercise jurisdiction, and they are contained in Part 2 of the second schedule to the 1999 Constitution as amended.
Now, there have been conversations on whether or not education should be run centrally, of course, in other words, whether it should be solely managed and funded by the federal government.
Now, a one-time Minister of State for Education, Professor Anthony Anwuka, is one of those who share this perspective. He was credited to have said at an informal setting that education must cease to be on the concurrent list and be a concern to the people. That's what he said. That's what he said,
yes, at an informal sitting. And of course, why not, whittling down the implications of that statement on separation of powers? But the stark reality is that it has become increasingly difficult for both arms of government to financially run institutions of higher learning in the country. Now, in one of the editions of Good Morning Nigeria, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Abuja specifically, who was one of the guests at the time, raised concerns about what he called shared responsibilities among interest groups. Now, that is the prompt for our conversation today on Good Morning Nigeria. I am Claire Dilabu Abdurrazak. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Claire, of course, I recall the point that you just referred to, which was one of the issues we discussed on that occasion. And incidentally, two of our guests at the time we had that conversation will also be part of today's conversation. But the pith of our talk this morning has to do with, as we said, the funding models or funding options for tertiary institutions. As we do know, there are at least 3 players now in tertiary education in Nigeria. You have the private sector, you have state governments, and then, of course, you have the federal government. And a number of the challenges that have arisen that have often also prompted the industrial action by ASU, those issues have got to do with the funding of tertiary institutions. So, but state governments have a way of funding their own institutions of higher learning, that's particularly universities, and federal government also has its own model. But it's becoming increasingly clear, as some persons have observed, that the free tuition regime in federal universities is unlikely to be sustainable. That's one of the issues, of course, we shall be taking a look at. And we all recall what happened in the 1970s, the Ali Mongo demonstrations that resisted the planned introduction of tuition in federal universities. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Claire to also welcome you to this edition of the program.
All right, we will, as always, comply with the program protocols. We have our own protocols here, and that will begin with highlights of the morning news. It will be read shortly, and then we'll take a bit of trending business news. And much later, Baya Toyebe will join us here to do his usual newspaper review. And if we do gain on time, as always, we'll take on sports and a bit of foreign news. So let's join Abdul Malik Adjo in the studio now for the morning news. Hello, Abdul Malik.
Good morning, Claire, and good morning, Kingsley. It's good to have you join us on the morning news. Now, the economic community of West African state, ECOWAS, has resolved to do everything within its power towards mitigating political crisis in the Republic of Mali. To this end, an extraordinary meeting of heads of state and government of sub-regional organization is to be held on Monday next week to further deliberate on issues raised at Bamako mediation talks with a view to finding lasting solutions. President Muhammadu Buhari, who participated in the peace talk, is back in Abuja, the nation's capital. Now, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has welcomed the offer of the international community to support the successful execution of the National Economic Sustainability Plan. The Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo, applauded the commitment of the international community to support Nigerians' response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the effort to take advantage of the crisis to effect significant changes in the critical sector of the Nigerian economy. At a virtual meeting with representatives of the international community from the United States, the European Union, United Kingdom, agencies of the United Nations, World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the Vice President also restated government's condolences on the recent killings of 5 aid workers by Boko Haram insurgents. The delegation plans to ensure there is an international alignment in support of Nigeria's government response to COVID-19. Now, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, has announced 604 new cases of COVID-19 in Nigeria. The latest figures raised brings the total number of confirmed cases to 38,948 infections in Nigeria. A breakdown of the Nigerian new cases from 21 states indicates that Lagos recorded highest number for the day with 203 cases, while Oyo State has 87. The Federal Capital Territory recorded 79, Edo 41, Osun 35, Ogun 24, Rivers and Kaduna recorded 22 cases each. Others are Akwa Ibom with 20, Plateau 18, Delta and Ebonyi recorded 9 cases each, and Imo has 8, Enugu, Kano and Cross River State has 5 cases each. Now, Katsina recorded 4, Nasarawa 3, Borno and Ekiti recorded 2 cases each. The day's tally is completed by Bauchi State, recording 1 case confirmed by the state. Now, Lagos has the highest with 14,009, followed by the Federal Capital Territory with 3,376 cases, and Oyo coming third with 2,306 cases. With the latest development, the total number of active cases stands at 22,054, while 16,061 cases have been successfully treated and discharged, while 833 patients died unfortunately. Now, schools will not reopen until safety measures for pupils and students are guaranteed by all stakeholders and tiers of government. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 gave this clarification at Thursday's plenary in Abuja.
When the tweet from the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is a member of the Presidential Task Force, went viral, that singular piece of information in the public space is sufficient proof to Nigerians that the virus is real and does not discriminate.
It doesn't know whether you are rich or poor, healthy or not. And it is absolutely not an elite disease.
The WAEC timetable, are you able to meet up with that date? Many states have come back to us and said they are unable to meet up with that date, which is why the Minister of Education explained that it will be dangerous to move children out on those dates, and that it is not proper for WAEC to then continue to insist on those dates. Therefore, we have requested that WAEC give us and the schools some time to meet up.
And the body of the first Nigerian female combat helicopter pilot, Flying Officer Tolulope Arotile, has been laid to rest with full military honors in Abuja.
That this young and confident first female combat helicopter pilot in the history of the Nigerian Air Force braved so many odds to get to where she was before her demise.
To the entire nation who mourn with our family and continue to show us love, we are sincerely grateful.
Those are the news highlights for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Clarence Kingsley after this break.
You are watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. It's time for business news with the CBN said to have received over 20 applications requesting some $60 and so billion for the pharmaceutical research purposes in order to boost Nigeria's health sector. Let's join our correspondent Chimobi Watanaji for the details.
Boosting domestic manufacturing of critical drugs and vaccines to ensure their sustainable domestic supply and reduce the bulk manufacturing costs of the drugs, herbal medicines and vaccines into Nigeria is the core of the over 100 billion naira earmarked for the health care sector in Nigeria by the Central Bank of Nigeria. The Governor, Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, noted that as a result of the importance of the project, the bank has reiterated its resolve to committing considerable human, material and financial resources to monitoring both the disbursement and utilization of this fund in a robust and verifiable manner.
This program is directly in conformity with our resolve to diversify the base of the Nigerian economy, be a catalyst for job creation, and facilitate inclusive economic growth in Nigeria.
Equities market for Thursday, 23rd July 2020 closed on a bullish note as the NSE All-Share Index appreciated by 1.40% to close at 24,512.27 basis points as against 0.00% flat position recorded previously. Its year-to-date returns currently stands at minus 8.68%. With business news, I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
All right, many thanks, Walter Naji, for the business package. Coming up shortly will be a review of the newspapers.
Reviewer Baya Chebe is with us in the studios. Baya, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kingsley. Good morning. Good morning, Claire.
Good morning, Baya.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Claire, let's begin with the Punch newspaper. Above the name flag, it says Nigeria lost $1.4 billion to chemical importation in 2019. That story is on page 17. We've identified plans to generate 18 trillion naira revenue. That's according to the federal government. WASC, federal government considers November-December GCE. That's on page 2. Akpabio recounts as reps move to sue for defamation and perjury. Well, you cannot sue. Perjury is a criminal offense, but you can sue for defamation. Akpabio recounts as reps move to sue for defamation. Number of Nigerian doctors in the United Kingdom rises to 7,875. Number of Nigerian doctors in the UK now nearly 8,000, according to the paper there, with 2 riders. India, Pakistan, and Nigeria have highest number of migrant doctors in the UK. Low pay, poor facilities, and insecurity forcing doctors out, says NMA. And then you can see the sidebar there on the front page. That's immediately below that. It says country with the most migrant doctors in the UK. You see the numbers: India, Iraq, Pakistan, Sudan, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Russia, Myanmar, and Australia. See then there, Nigeria ranks number 3. On the African continent, of course, Nigeria is number 1. Okay, now the photographs on the front page come from the funeral ceremony yesterday for Nigeria's first female helicopter combat pilot. NAF, that's Nigerian Air Force, and others pay tributes as Arotile is buried in Abuja. Reps to probe Northeast Development Agency over missing 100 billion naira. That's page 9, 100 billion. Policemen sack FCT mobile court for arresting colleagues. Policemen sack FCT mobile court for arresting colleagues, page 9. Tension as women protest southern Kaduna killings, half naked, page 9. Clear.
All right, we have quite a number of stories on the front page. Daily Trust is what I'm taking from, and the lead story is Reps allege 100 billion fraud in Northeast Development Commission, as Kingsley read earlier on, and it comes with quite a number of riders. We didn't get up to 100 billion naira NEDC MD, and we're not aware of allegation. That's the ministry. And Senate asks NDDC to refund 4.9 billion naira, and we can't join issues with legislators. Okay, those are the trending riders there to the lead story. But other stories trending just a bit below the nameplate. COVID-19 banned Salah festivities, federal government tells governors. And private varsities plan campus resumption. The details of that on page 8. Kaduna traders struggle for survival as markets remain closed, page 7. And Kingsley also talked about the picture stories on the front page. I'm sure these are the picture stories that will dominate most of the national dailies today. That's the remains of Nigeria's first female combat helicopter pilot being laid to rest yesterday at the National Military Cemetery in Abuja. Tears as flying officer Arotile is buried in Abuja. It's captioned right there beneath the picture stories. Now, trending stories at the foot of the paper, and this one is quite interesting. We've attained 92% in GOATS loan to women. We've attained 92% in GOATS loan to women. Governor Badaro, details on page 37. Now, Dangote cement promo, of course, will mitigate COVID-19 impact on economy. Rice farmers begin sale of paddy to Kanu millers. Bayo, which of them, I'm sure, is the picture stories, of course?
Yes, the picture story tells it all. Our heart goes out to the family of the Arotile, where Tolulokwe, the first female helicopter combat pilot, whose life was cut short in an accident, was laid to rest yesterday. She was given the full military honors as one who has died in active combat in the service of her fatherland. The Chief of Defense Staff, Chief of Air Staff, Governor of Kogi State, joined her 4 sisters who were at the graveside as part of the ceremony. Her family said the family is consoled by the fact that, in spite of the painful loss, she was able to achieve her childhood dream. There were graveside orations by officer chaplains, and the Chief of Air Staff described her as a patriotic, sound, courageous, and dedicated officer. Your memory will always remain fresh in our hearts each time we remember you. There were prayers, there were wreaths led by the Chief of Defense Staff and the Chief of Air Staff. There were the firing of valor. Her classmates honored her. They were all there in regalia to pay their last respect. After the presentation of national colors to her family, a minute silence was observed and her casket was lowered. Good night, Nigeria's flying angel. President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday traveled to Mali as part of the negotiating team to restore peace to Mali. Nigerians saw the president for the first time wearing a face mask. Experts had explained that when you are in your safe environment, as he has always been at the presidential villa, you don't need to wear a face mask. It is only those who come to visit that are required to wear a face mask. Meanwhile, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control says that we now have 59 laboratories in 29 states testing. And our challenge now is to continue to test and continue to test. NDC disclosed that there are now 2 radio diagnostic equipment that is awaiting validation. They had achieved this with Medical Laboratory Science Council of Nigeria. Dr. Chike Ihekwazu says that the target is for Nigeria to test 2 million people by the end of July. So far, 251,892 people have been tested in the nation. Nigeria is planning to carry out 3,000 to 4,000 tests daily. With the number of laboratories we now have across the country, we should be able to do that, because at the outset of COVID-19, we had only 3 laboratory tests, but now today we have 59 laboratory tests, and that will be able to help us achieve that target. Meanwhile, yesterday we had 604 new cases, and they were recorded in 20 states. Lagos shot up again, recording 203 cases. It was followed by only Oyo State that had 37. All the other states had lower figures. But coincidentally, the United States has tested the largest so far in the world. By way of testing, they have tested 52,952. They have recorded 52,942,145 tests, out of which they have discovered 5,046,000 cases. That is about 10%. In Nigeria, as of today, we have tested 251,893, and we have discovered 228,344. That brings it about 15.2%. At the Presidential Task Force briefing, the Minister of Education says that secondary school students may have to resort to taking the General Certificate of Education in November if the date set by the West Africa Examination Council is not agreed upon. Chief Emeka Nwajuba said that the ministry is still meeting with stakeholders on 30th of July to assess preparation for reopening of schools. There was this report that was read about a policeman was arrested, not wearing a mask, and also having overloaded his car. He called another colleague of policemen, and they were trying to resist arrest. The PTF, FCT PTF, was able to force them to the mobile court, where they were tried and sentenced to a fine or pay community service. But what they did was to call their colleagues at the mobile police barrack, and they came, shot at the police. Everybody scampered, including the magistrate, and disbanded even the canopy that has been mounted there.
Well, this incident took place in one of the suburbs on the outskirts of Abuja.
Yes.
And it's very worrisome. It's very worrisome, because this is the kind of impunity that compromises the established protocols for reducing the community spread of coronavirus. This is virtually the same equivalent of VIPs and big men going to the airport, refusing to observe the protocols, including getting their luggage decontaminated, or slapping or assaulting airport officials who are insisting on the right things to be done. Happily, the details of the individuals are very well reported here, and of course, the mobile court itself should have information of the particulars of the persons who were involved. Yes. We know that the FCT Police Command, headed by Police Commissioner Chiroma, is a very proactive person.
No, he's a no-nonsense.
Yes, he doesn't nonsense. The officers who were the non-commissioned officers, they were apparently, who were responsible for this, should of course face the required disciplinary measures. I'm sure the fact that you are a police, this is part of the challenge that we have. Law enforcement officers, when you say wear a crash helmet when you're on a bike, you find that law enforcement officers, more particularly policemen, all they use will be their beret. That's all that they have. A beret cannot save you when you have a crash, you know, in an automobile, in a motorbike accident. And so they flout the rules, and they believe that they are a law unto themselves. I think this should be one of the examples that they should set.
I think it should. Bayo, we We're told to round up. So,
okay.
so I just have to stop. But I needed to clear this, the story about the goats. It's actually a revolving empowerment initiative, initiated by the governor of Jigawa State. Goats are given out as soft loans to women as empowerment. So just to clear, that there was a story I read.
What are they?
Goats.
Goats.
Domestic rearing of goats.
Rearing of goats. Women apparently do rear goats for maybe economic purposes. So
of course. I mean, the meat of a goat is very healthy. There's no question about that.
It's no red meat.
Goat also produce milk, which they can. But how many goats did this person get? That's the key thing. And where are the goats carried? Are they browsing around eating people's yams and cassava?
It's a soft loan for women.
Soft loan.
Yes, it's given out as soft loan. All right. You have to round off.
I was going to draw attention to what happened in Barikin Ladi.
We don't have time. Please,
yes.
let's do
People
this.
were taken to court and criminals came and rescued, just similar to what happened that day.
That's right. That's lawless.
Lawlessness, yes.
By your tribute, they say we should switch off your mic. And it's okay with you.
Thank
you very much for being around today. We hope you enjoy your weekend, and then we'll see you on Monday. All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We're taking a short break. Now, when we return, of course, we'll get ahead with discussing funding models for tertiary institutions. That's to say, educational institutions.
All right, welcome back. If you've just joined in, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of Africa's largest TV network, NTA. Our discussion this morning will be focused on financing models for tertiary institutions, and we'll take this background report to kickstart our conversation. It's packaged by Abdul Salam Jibrin.
Quality higher education is vital to a nation's development, and there is the ultimate need to make it relevant and responsive to the needs of the society. A reliable and sufficient funding model is recognized by education watchers as a necessity for achieving excellence in tertiary education in Africa and, by extension, Nigeria. However, tertiary institutions in Nigeria have historically fallen below expectation in the area of funding. Adequately funded universities not only ensure a higher standard of university curriculum, but also have the potential to result in competitive advantages over other universities. Nigerian universities, regardless, function with shortage in key educational resources, such as research development, library facilities, and science lab equipments, amongst others. Due to these challenges, tertiary institutions in the country are handicapped, thereby limiting potentials. More than ever before, innovative or alternative sources of funding for the ivory tower have become critical. Now, how can Nigeria surmount the challenge of underfunding of her tertiary institutions? What alternative funding models can be adopted towards making tertiary institutions become the pride of Nigerians and Africa? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will speak to these issues and more in a moment.
Many thanks, Abdul Salam, for that background up. With us in the studios to discuss this topic, as we indicated earlier, we have two of our guests who were with us a couple of weeks ago when we first focused on the education sector. Let's welcome once again Chief Chukwuemeka Nwanjuba, who is the Honorable Minister of State for Education. Honorable Minister, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning.
Also here with us in the studios is Professor Abdul Rashid Nala, he is Vice Chancellor, University of Abuja. Prof, pleasure to have you with us again.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Okay, we have joining us from our Benin Network Center in Edo State, Professor Lilian Salami. She's Vice Chancellor, University of Benin. We're very glad to have you join us on the program.
Thank you. Good morning for having me. And my Honorable Minister, thank you also, and welcome to the program. Thanks.
All right. So as we indicated, this is a continuation of a conversation we earlier had. First conversation, of course, was broad-based in terms of milestones in the education sector, plus the challenges arising. And one of the key challenges identified on that occasion had to do with proper funding of tertiary educational institutions. Honorable Minister, we'll return to this subject matter one more time because it's a key aspect sometimes when ASU, which is the Academic Staff Union of Nigerian universities, when they go on strike, the issue is about poor funding, poor facilities, and all of that. But some of those aspects are already being addressed. And happily, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Abuja himself was also here. He talked about stakeholder involvement in proper funding. But for the benefit of some of our viewers who may not have had the opportunity of listening to that earlier conversation, let's just indicate when we are talking about funding of tertiary education, what are we looking at, particularly from the government side?
Thank you, Kingsley. And let us put this in context. Nigeria figured that there is a huge need to grow as much workforce as possible. And they felt, and rightly so, that if this were left to the hands of those who could afford it, it would never happen. So simply, there began a massive expansion of capacity from just 2 universities pre-independence, Soka and Ibadan. Today we have nearly, what we say, it's not, and even with all of that, Nigeria's capacity to produce wealth has not expanded. What has happened is we've still been relying on oil from the days and being able to cultivate a few crops to feed ourselves. Other than that, nothing tremendous has happened. But what has Nigeria gotten for all of this? For all the people we train, we still hemorrhage all the people we train. Just so recently, you heard that about 56 medical doctors were moved from the country to go and look for greener pastures. Nigeria has trained nearly 65,000 medical doctors, and we have less than 25,000 of them in the country. Everybody else is feeding fat on these largesse that Nigerian government has over the years, and Nigerian people have trained their people, and people move away with what they have learned, and they don't owe the country, and there's no bonding system, there is no requirement for you to address that in the country. Everybody takes from the country. And the huge number of universities and colleges of education and polytechnics that have been established just in this 50 years, all of them basically from government resources, whether they are at the federal level or state government levels, are all creations of government. Then the few that are private, I mean, maybe trained maybe less than 10%, and this has just been in the last 20 years. Most of the oldest private universities, from the ones of Madonna, Elela, and all those people, are just in the last 20 years. So really, Nigeria has had the unfortunate experience of its people not really having its interest at heart, and seeing these largesse that government has produced as something they should take advantage of and then use it for themselves in spite of that. ASU has pressed, and you also need to situate this in a historical background, that because at the time of the military, all the years that the military was in power, they were the bastion of agitation for both expansion and better quality in a non-democratic setting. They stood up against and resisted and forced the creation of the Education Tax Fund, which all companies in Nigeria, every company in Nigeria, bring 2% of their tax belt and pay into a central fund. That fund is called TET Fund. By 2011, when we now had a thriving democracy, at the National Assembly, we decided that in order for this to be meaningful, we should concentrate a little bit only on the tertiary institutions that are broad in their approach. So in 2011, the National Assembly passed the tertiary TET Fund bill, which then could reduce the numbers so that the funds are no longer available to private public primary schools and public secondary schools, and concentrated on the tertiary institutions because there was a further need. Federal government has also since then, in their negotiations with ASU subsequently, pledged to continue providing funds within the limits of what the federal government can afford. We did the needs assessment in every university. We did so many of the agreements that were, some part of those agreements have still not been met, and that's why ASU is still agitating. It's not like ASU is saying something that is completely unreasonable. The only thing that makes ASU's requests seems somewhat otus is because, as we speak, they know, like every other person, that government can't afford half of the things that they're asking for. And the reality is, as we push forward, we are now at oil selling at 41. The entire workforce of Nigeria, those who are on IPPS at the moment, probably can't be paid even from federal government's revenue, because the entire, in fact, somebody was suggesting, at what point do we close down the numbers? Because really, this seems to be the only welfare scheme in Nigeria, because if you come to federal ministries, you come to ministries everywhere, people are just loitering. A lot of people are overemployed. Ministries are overemployed, overstaffed, and people just collect salaries for things that they do. So really, it's the only welfare system. And Nigeria, even to pay that money, and government recognizes the social importance and economic benefit in continuing to pay them, because if you don't pay them, nobody will run the economy. As people don't have money to spend, if there's no consumer power, then the entire business community will fold. So government is not being unreasonable. Government actually knows that it's in the interest of the larger public to continue to just carry as many of these people who are employed as possible.
Sorry for me to interject. It's government finding it difficult to fund tertiary education. Is that what it is?
Yes. Government, first of all, government is not finding it difficult. It is difficult. It's not government to find, because there's nothing that is situated in the hands of government. We have to look at the portfolio that is available. When you're talking about funding something, you're going to be drawing it from somewhere. If you're not creating wealth and you keep talking about finding it, it's like the money is not there.
So we've established that government cannot fund education any longer. Prof, what is the weight?
No, Claire, I think that's a bit absolutist.
Well,
I'm sorry, that's not the conclusion you read. That does not follow. It's a fallacy then. Because really, what we're saying is that in the potpourri and in the context of how big the economy and the nation is, it is a difficult find. Not that government can't find it.
Well, Kingsley.
To say that government can't continue to fund
any longer
education.
That's not what you said.
That's not.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Well, it's an academic environment that we are in, Prof.
Okay. I just like the Prof, because you raised this issue, and you're also managing, a federal institution. What is the weight of the challenges that needs to be addressed in terms of, infrastructure and, of course, in terms of content?
Well, thank you so much again for inviting me, back to this discussion, very important discussion. In fact, if you ask me, I really don't think we have a greater issue to discuss. I mean, nations of the world who do not have the kind of resources that we have in Nigeria, who are able to mobilize and make their nations great, through manpower development. The kind of things that their people are able to mobilize and make their nations great. Japan is an example. It doesn't have that much resources, but its human resources is able to create so much. And the whole world looks to Japan, up to Japan for so much. And we can do this in Nigeria if we're able to mobilize and create this kind of manpower. Well, without question, federal government is doing a lot. Up till now, nobody pays tuition in federal universities. As far as I'm concerned, that's a huge contribution by federal government. But education at that level, it's enormous. And it needs everybody to be on the table. And that's the point I keep making. It's not just the federal government, putting resources on the table. It's also everybody. And that's why I personally felt that, yes, the dilapidation that we have in our universities, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of teaching facilities, the kind of standard even of the personnel, of academic, and the kind of processes, that go on, the kind of opportunities that students have within the universities. We have to discuss all of this, and we have to have a goal at mind. What kind of nation do we really want to become? How do we want our universities to contribute to this? How can we get these resources? It cannot be one way or the other. I mean, if we're not ready to get a nation that is strong enough for our future, that makes Nigeria competitive among nations of the world, if we don't want that, then we continue the way we are. But if we really are determined, then we cannot just leave it the way it is. We have to sit down to say, how much do we need? How can we get these resources? Federal government is saying this is what we can do. And we're hearing now that, government cannot do it all, right? So do we then leave out the other aspect? No. Let's sit down. How do we get all these resources? Because we must get it. We must get it, and universities must be vibrant. I mean, it's just unfair to have people go to private universities and they have everything to learn from, and then others go to public universities and it's shabby, it's poor, there are no facilities, and these are the same Nigerians. I mean, I just thought it's not even good for us. It's not good for our nation. It just shows us as if we are not serious. So that's my own take. I just feel that a discussion has to be had. We must all sit down to understand what it is. And everybody, academic, that's the professors, you say, who are members of ASU, or those who are not members of ASU, non-teaching staff in the universities, management, governing councils, parents, industries, local and international organizations. Everybody must sit down. We have to have a way out. And that's really, it's overdue.
Prof, thank you very much. Let's go over now to our Benin Network Center, where a while ago you saw the Vice Chancellor of the University of Benin, Professor Lillian Salami. Prof, from your point of view, how enormous is the funding challenge for tertiary education in Nigeria? Is it a system-wide problem or institution-specific?
I think in any university, especially the public-funded ones, the major problem that we have actually is funding. And I'm happy to hear from my colleague that this cannot be done by just government alone. And so the questions we must begin to ask ourselves is, should we leave funding to just government? Should it be only beneficiaries who should fund the universities? Or it should be something that should actually involve both. And then, of course, we must begin to also find out how do we manage the proportions. Because as it is now, government cannot actually fund universities alone. We have a huge, huge deficit in terms of human and material infrastructural deficiencies. And this, of course, is because all of this is placed on just the shoulder of government. And I wonder, what that has always baffled me is a situation where we think that we can still continue to rest on the belief that education can actually be free, especially at the tertiary level. Education, we know, is quite capital intensive, labor intensive, and therefore our government cannot do it alone. Government is trying, they've put in structures. The TED fund, like the Honorable Minister mentioned, has really done well with their interventions. But again, it is just not enough. When you visit some of our institutions, especially again the public funded ones, it is pathetic what you find there. The buildings, infrastructural decay, dilapidated buildings, laboratories are not equipped. Even where you have those classrooms and lecture theaters, they are so run down that our students are actually not learning under conducive environment. And so there are many questions we must ask ourselves so that we can revisit the issue of who funds university or how university should actually be adequately funded. Like I said, many questions. And so those questions must, of course, be answered if we must get to where we need to get to. Otherwise, it will just be a mirage, it will just be a dream that may never be achievable if we think the way that the funding is done now can take us anywhere. So I think we need to sit down and really fashion out ways of funding the educational sector, especially tertiary education. You cannot expect to have quality graduates in the environment that we now operate, under which we now operate. Like I said, everything is really down and continue to go down unless we do something and do something very quickly.
Let's get back to the Honorable Minister. You know, what are the funding windows right now for, you know, public institutions?
For public institutions, maybe you should ask the Vice Chancellor, because he's now running one, so he knows where all the funding. I can only tell you what we give. What we give may not be all of it, because each institution is somewhat unique. Also, the dialect is for those who are in the cities are a little bit, you know, somewhat different from those. It's the administrator that actually will say that, but there's the official National Assembly allocations. For the state universities, they receive something from their state. Sometimes some states, some don't even give. I mean, some they will have it in their books that they've given, but it never gets to the school anyway. And this, you see, I'm not an expert in everything. I'm an expert in being a Nigerian, and being a Nigerian requires a lot of wit. You need to understand what is going on. Sometimes what you say and sometimes you see on paper an allocation from National Assembly. For the rest, that year, they may not get those allocations. Now, the fact that something has been put in the budget does not translate that even the Vice Chancellor can bank on it. The leg work he needs to do in Ministry of Finance. In fact, university may get their own. It's quite complicated. It's not as easy as, yes, we have given you allocation. Things don't work like that. Right? It's the same thing with TED Fund. TED Fund by law shouldn't. When I came in as chairman of TED Fund, one of the things we did with the young man who was Professor Dr. Bafa, we agreed immediately. No, the way TED Fund was run under the PDP government, let me not put party in it, was such that you could come to Abuja and start discussing what will happen in a university in Benin. We felt that wasn't what the law said. The law simply said, because my background as a lawyer is that whatever I read is what I'm going to try to do. And what the law said is that the university will decide what they want to do with their money. You don't stay in Abuja and allocate a special project to drain a place that does not have water. I mean, and this was the kind of stuff we were seeing on paper. So really, it will sound like TED Fund had given so much, but there were so many abandoned projects. Even in the University of Abuja, I was livid at a time when we went to inspect. You go to Calabar, you go to everywhere. I toured around the place, and projects weren't being done. The university, you ask for lecturers, and when I say being an expert in being a Nigerian, I will tell you about the human element. You've just heard today and on newspaper that policemen who disobeyed the law were angry that one of their own colleagues was being tried for disobeying the law. They disbanded the magistrate court in Abuja in 2020. I'm not talking about 1951. They beat up the people and disbanded the place. That is how you need to understand about being a Nigerian. That same group of professors who agitated for this money to be given. We give monies for conferences. You heard somebody say, and it became something that they said they were looking for the conference papers for all the people we gave. We have issues with people who we want to train as PhD holders. They were absconded from the country. You will have issues, some things that will happen in Nigeria, you will cry. I went on inspection and I met a Nigerian PhD lecturer who we had paid his school fee. His own cooperative members in the university in Akure here took the money, kept it in a bank, refused to give it to him, and then gave it to him from their credit union as a loan. Nigerians can do some things that it's not even explainable. Why any human being will do the kind of... So really, you can finish all the law. You can make all the allocations you want to make. And the interpretation, what we see on ground and what is on paper do not marry. When you ask university now to charge money, even if they're going to collect any money, it becomes an issue about all the tribes in that state, how they can get together, get the bossa, get the registrar, get the VC, get everyone. So that if they all agree, then they will never, you will never hear about what that. So when government now said, let us do TSA. Central, everybody protested, and therefore it will not work. So really, you have to understand being a Nigerian first to understand how these monies, it's not as if monies do not exist. You will go to some schools and you ask yourself, what does it take? What kind of funding is required to repair chairs in the place? What do you need federal government to allocate you money to tighten the screws? To when you're passing on a passageway, why would it take federal government to remove cobweb from under you? If you go to some schools, you will see equipment that government has bought packed outside in the rain. You see, these things do not require funding. It requires attitudinal change. Nigerians need to understand that. In fact, when Prof cited the example of Japan, one of the first things we learned about Japan and development is that aptitude more than an attitude, more than your funds, determines your latitude. That's what we often say. Attitude is everything. Nigerians do not have the development attitude. Everybody is thinking of taking away from the system and not how they can improve it. So if you like, fund from now till tomorrow without the requisite interest, you will not get any result.
Well, Honorable Minister, thank you very much. You've already, as it were, leapfrogged into the issue of management of current or existing resources in our tertiary institutions. But you were talking about what it takes to run existing institutions. Your brother, Minister Babatunde Fashola, learned senior advocate, Minister of Works and Housing, is currently tarring roads in federal universities. Tarring roads, internal roads in federal universities. And some persons are wondering when they will start changing light bulbs in the lecture theaters through the Federal Ministry of Works. But let's come back to our guest, Professor Abdul Rashid Nala, Vice Chancellor of the University of Abuja. Fine, we know some of the items. So when you want to fund, what is it that you are funding? What are the items of expenditure?
Yeah, well, thank you very much again. And I'm really happy that the Honorable Minister cited as an example our great University of Abuja, the UOV of Nigeria, the University for National Unity, which will be a pride to all of us. And you enter the university and you just cover your faces. I mean, you feel, wow, is this a university really in terms of infrastructure, in terms of just the environment, just being in a place where you feel, yes, I'm in Nigeria, this is a great nation. This is a university that represents our nation, which is a pride of nation, of the nation. But it's not so.
What will you say University of Nigeria?
Well, I can talk more about the great UOB of Nigeria, University of Abuja. The truth is that infrastructure is fundamental. Students want to stay in the good infrastructure. They want to be there throughout the day, even the night. Academic want to be in their offices doing research, in their laboratories doing research. They're not afraid that, security lapses might happen. They want, to connect to the world, and they can easily do it from campus. Electricity, water, all amenities that makes life better, like that enable you to think, because really what we do in the system is to create ideas, to think for nation, to think about what it is you collaborate to do with NGOs, with industries, for government, for ordinary people, for communities, economic, political, technological, all the areas. And you need a kind of environment that makes you want to do that. And the University of Abuja that I met is not that kind of university. And really, I must say that it's a duty to all of us, and every university deserves to be this way. Well, it's very true that attitudinal situation with all of us matter. But the truth is that, and that's why I'm saying we have to decide whether really we are serious as a nation that wants to get this done. If an academic feels that all he needs is to collect his salary and probably not even come to teach, wait until 3 weeks before the end of the semester before you teach, or you feel you're a full professor, therefore you don't have any business doing the work that you are paid to do, when in fact at the professorial level is when you actually begin that's the beginning of being an academic, really. Other earlier levels are training levels. Or when you think that, you know, you work in the works department, you're a cleaner, or you are supposed to be technologist, and you don't do nothing. So these are, yes, attitudinal that must be, you know, harnessed. And that's why I say it is still about all of us sitting down together to say, yes, we are serious about this nation. We want things to change. Our universities must be universities in the real sense of the word. And then collaboration, industries. Do we work with industries? Do industries are even interested in working with us? How many industries fund projects in Nigerian university system? How many academic goes to industry? Every day in a week, do you set aside a day that you think is an industry day to show an industry that, look, you're making 50 million profits in a year, but this product can be improved such that you can make 100 million, and all you need, you know, I need 2 million research grant that we can work together with you to make this happen. I mean, do we have laws in Nigeria that mandate industries to contribute regularly to university? You know, directly. Yeah, they contribute through TED Fund. But do we have, because TED Fund contribution is a general one, there has to be contribution that is targeted to product development, that is targeted to internship for young people, that is targeted to specific lives of our nation. Do we have industries working? Don't industries just bring ideas for development from abroad in which they do it, yet we have Nigerian universities, Nigerian professors that they can work with? Do you have government doing it? Is a ministry announcing every ministry of government giving what they identify as their goals within the year? Do they work with universities to say, look, we want to increase funding, we want to increase our economy, we want to develop our economy. How do we make it happen? Do they throw, you know, research grant opportunities to all Nigerian professors and say, look, submit your ideas. This is the goal we want to achieve. We want to see the best way to do it. Let's work together with you. Ministry of Environment can do this. Ministry of Finance can do this. Ministry of Education can do this. Ministry of Women Affairs can do this. Funding of university system, it has to be holistic. It's everybody doing it. NGOs, you know, students have to do their own in terms of, you know, what they contribute. Do we have students who even work on campus and therefore complement whatever their parents give them to use? University of Abuja, this is the kind of thing we're trying to do. And I feel that if we have the way we continue to have the support of the ministry and TED Fund and everybody, we must be the model.
How are you going to achieve that? What is the framework for achieving that?
Well, I just explained that everybody must play its role. And the framework, we have to all sit down together. What we're doing at the University of Abuja is just on our own. You know, we have employment scheme for our students. We employ them. We give opportunity for them to learn what it is. I mean, neither has no gender, what it is to work and earn, even as you study and meet the criteria to graduate in the university. We also mobilize and say academic staff must have to go through rigorous processes, you know, of evaluation. We're saying you must go out and collaborate with industry. We have, you know, we've set up, linkages units in the university in which we want industries to be directly relevant to every department. Every academic program must have what we call an industry partner, you know, not just for students to do internship, but for them to come on the table and review curriculum. I mean, if we graduate students only for industry to say, no, you do not fit to work with us. You can't, because, you know, that's not what we expect. But if you are with us all the time, even at the curriculum level, we develop it in such a way that by the time they graduate, they are ready to go into your industry to work. So we said every academic program must have minimum of one industry partner. I mean, and so on and so forth. But there are a lot to do. The point is just that there has to be a dialogue. Government is saying we're spending money. How are you spending money? Are you just throwing, paying salary? Is that all it is? Is university just about salary payment? Okay, we give research. What about accountability? I mean, Honorable Minister said some people are given money to go to conferences and they don't go. What happened to them?
I just want to, Professor Rashid, Abdul Rashid.
A lot of questions.
Yeah,
really.
thank you very much. I want to return to Professor Salame in our Benin Network studios. Incidentally, Professor Naala, of course, has given an indication of options available to institutions to generate their own internal revenue and expand the frontiers of research and learning. But I'm just wondering, the question I asked him, I would like you to also respond to that. Namely, when we talk about funding, what exactly do we want to fund? Maybe we can, from there, get into the metrics of funding. Because what is the most expensive item to run a university? Salaries, I will presume, for instance, and that's already taken care of by the federal government. Infrastructure, to a large extent, TED Fund is already dealing with that, even though it still has a long way to go. What are the other items of expenditure that universities get into, and why is this continuing shortfall in the funding?
Thank you very much. If you look at the current funding that we get for federal government, for instance, 90% of that actually goes into recurrent expenditure, which of course is personnel, wages, and overhead. And then only about 10 or even less than that would go to the capital. Where we have major problems actually has to do with the capital expenditure area. So the university cannot run on the current IGRO that we generate from the little stipends that are paid as school charges from our students. So that really falls short of where we need to go. We need to have our laboratories. A lot of the funding coming from TED Fund now, and again, like I have said, we cannot thank the project enough, the funds enough, because at least they are helping us. But you find that sometimes we are also faced with getting chemicals for even those laboratories, research collaborations we don't have, our students that are really that need assistance actually can't get assistance. In the past, for instance, schools used to give scholarships to students, indigent students that are actually identified among these children. Now we don't have anything of that nature. So they fall back to the little IGRO that we actually generate. Remember, the purpose of institutions actually isn't to start selling water, producing bread. We are here to actually sell knowledge, which we are trying to do by developing programs, different programs. But again, that cannot take us anywhere. What comes, and I'll give you a good example. I was just discussing with my boss only a few days ago. What comes as electricity utilization supply, or the money that comes there, is about 300,000 a year. What we, for instance, get from the university on a monthly basis run into double-figure millions. So that, again, we must get from our IGRO. The minister talked about roads construction. Most universities, we don't even have access roads. Again, can our IGRO carry that? No, we cannot. We have old buildings. Most of us are second generation universities, where you have buildings that are very old, cannot actually suffice the number of students that we now have, because, of course, just as universities are growing, so are the student enrollment growing, staff, number of staff are coming. So the pressure on the facilities that we have actually is much, and we cannot maintain from our IGRO. And that is why, most students can't even enjoy, like I said earlier on, learning in conducive environments. So we have all these issues. Researches cannot be properly carried out. You are dealing with epileptic electricity. Thank God for University of Benin now that we have a dedicated line, so 24/7 we have light. Thank God for that. You're dealing with no water. Students cannot actually function. We're dealing with staff insufficient spaces for staff. Offices are not well furnished for staff to create conducive environments where they can work maximally. So yes, we talk about attitude, but attitude also is driven by the resources or motivation that you have. If you do not have the motivation that is needed to actually perform maximally, the likelihood is that you may actually easily fall into having the terrible attitudes that we begin to find in our universities. So I think we have lots and lots of issues. Like I have said, IGRO and the little that comes from the government to fund capital is just not enough to drive the university where the universities ought to be. So that is, part of some of the major problems that we have.
Salami, I really want to hammer now, not hit. I want to hammer the nail on the head and ask you this question. Beyond the IGR, what other funding options are, available? Would increase in school fees, tuition, be a comfortable route?
In most institutions of higher learning outside this country, more than 50% of their funding comes from student fees. What we have is that we keep saying that education is capital intensive, yet we cannot charge fees, decent fees. Our students cannot pay decent fees. I'll tell you, Professor Okebukola some years, carried out a research and actually said to train one student in social sciences, where you have the least material needed, will cost 345,000 naira per year. Of course, that is on the high side. But what we now charge students is patent compared to that. We charge 17, maximum 47,000, which can't even which we can't even use to run the accommodation, to make the accommodation fit for students. So we are really not charging students, and students are not paying. But the reality is that we must realize that we cannot get good quality education that we require if students do not pay for these services. And I think that is very clear. So we must begin to address the situation, whether we truly want quality education at the expense of students not paying. Again, let me quickly just throw in here. Most parents who bring their children to public schools are not parents who cannot actually afford to send their children to other paying institutions. But the attitude that everything that is public must be free, because since it is government-owned, it must be free. We cannot pay. But those same students, when they cannot get admission into public universities, are taken to private universities. So what we are getting here is that since you don't charge them, they run there, and that becomes their first choice. So unless we begin to, ask students to pay decent fees, we really cannot get out of this quagmire. The second thing also is that we must also leverage on the platform of our alumni associations. A lot of us, the University of Benin has graduated over 300,000 students. A lot of them are placed in really, corporate organizations, medical doctors, all walks of life. So right now, I've been discussing with my alumni from the University of Benin that they must come to our aid. What has built the ivory towers outside this country actually isn't government as such. It is actually from the alumni association. Like my colleague also said, Prof, that we need also to look at industries that these students graduate to work in. They must be able to pay back some of the resources that are put in training these children that eventually go back to work with them. So we have lots and lots of non-governmental organizations, philanthropic organizations that actually can help to drive the educational sector in this country. Therefore, that will reduce the amount of pressure that is placed on the federal government. There is nowhere in the world where we have enough money to run education. And there is also nowhere where we have too much money to run education. But we must find a balance. And that balance, of course, like I've said, must we must begin to come to the drawing table where those who are beneficiaries must contribute to their training, and also the government must expand or increase their allocations, as well as other stakeholders that must come to the table so that we can then move the educational sector to where it ought to be. Thank you.
Right. Professor Lilian Salami, thank you very much. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. I want to come back to the Vice Chancellor of University of Abuja. There is a clear distinction in terms of the availability of tertiary education in Nigeria today. State universities, there are private universities, you have state government-run universities, and federal-run universities. You were in charge of a state-run university. That's to say, by state government. The dynamics of funding do not appear to be the same. What are the issues there with the funding of state-owned universities, and what is the contribution of the stakeholders?
Well, at the state level, specifically, my own experience was at Kwara State University, where I was Vice Chancellor for 10 years. State universities are able to charge tuition, as every student paid about a total about maybe 100,000,
per session or
per naira per session, per session, which is distributed between the actual tuition and some other sundry fees that they pay. There are people who obviously will pay more than that. Some state universities also charge according to academic program. If you go for engineering, you pay more than if you go for a program in social sciences and so on. So these are opportunities for state universities. But you also talk about, what part of Nigeria. Sometimes in some part of Nigeria, state universities do not charge as much as other parts of Nigeria charge. But at Kwara State, we charge between 100,000, 150,000 to sometimes 200,000. And this money, goes into quite a lot of activities, which included infrastructure, especially when you are planning, to meet the NUC guidelines in terms of what you must provide. You use part of this money. State government at the beginning at Kwara State were paying salary, but my last 5 years, experience was an experience in which there was no kobo paid from the state government, and so we had even to a salary. So we had to really mobilize and develop a strategy to get this done. At Federal University, the problem is that,
just explain that further. You didn't collapse.
We did not collapse, but it was tough. It was extremely tough. I mean, I don't think it can happen where a proprietor, it is right where a proprietor will say we're not giving a kobo even to a salary. I mean, it was a tough experience, but we survived it. But it was very tough. I mean, some other things had to go. We had to, mobilize and strategize, and we were always on alert, and we survived it, definitely. But you see, the point I'm making is that, and I like, what the Vice Chancellor of University of Abuja said. Benin said, stakeholders must have to make up their minds. It's either, if you think you are from a poor background, therefore, all you need your child to have is a certificate that means nothing, then that's your decision.
Who will enable that?
Well, the point is that everybody must make up its mind, and federal government has to say, okay, this is how much we have, this is how we want to do it. Parents must, students must, industries must, all of us must. And then the attitudinal change is important. Efficiency, effectiveness, prudence, accountability, all these are part of the game. I mean, how do you have in a university a huge number of staff, and then you look at the area where they must work and the effect is less? That cannot happen. So the university itself must have to discuss. Maintenance culture is number one. I mean, you can't have a building that was just put down in 1990, already dilapidated. What happened to it? university tradition around the world. You go to universities of 18th century, 1750, 1890. They're still very beautiful. You don't want to leave their campus because there's maintenance culture.
Which is an important point. Honorable Minister, let's bring you in here again. Some persons argue that part of the governance challenge for our tertiary educational institutions has to do with what has been referred to as a parastatal mentality. Earlier, we were talking about aptitude, and the Vice Chancellor of the University of Abuja is just telling us those little things, maintenance culture, what you need to do to get a system running and working efficiently. Most of the kind of things you'll find in the private sector. What is it that can be done to alter this mindset of a parastatal? You wait for your salary to come. If the Ministry of Works doesn't come to change your bulb, so be it. Infrastructure begins to decay right before your eyes. You have an industrial borehole, it's collapsing, and then you do nothing about it. Your hostels are run down, you have a works department, nothing happens. How can we begin to change that? Because again, that's part of, when people talk about the unsavory sites that you find in university environments, this is part of it.
Well, thank you again. And I like to say things I've done coming into government. For the past 27 years, I've been in government, so I more or less try to contribute at little points. Truly, does not matter how much money you have, attitude is key. And I go back to attitude all the time, because I've seen a very young university that has been transformed in less than 5 years. Not because my elder brother is the Vice Chancellor there, but at Ndufu Alike, when I first visited it as Chairman of the Third Fund, and from what I've seen in the last 4 years, it's a miracle. It's a transformation. And with the same resources that were available at the time, it's just, how do you want to refocus? You can take engineering students. I didn't realize that he could do that, but the Vice Chancellor decided he was going to take engineering students to be the messers and workers. They started building this. So civil engineering students were now molding blocks and constructing blocks. Everything about building, suddenly they seem like actual students. They weren't just sagging and walking around. They were now serious students. He did that with the botany department, the entire 200, how many acres of land where every species of African known product is planted. So now, see, I think the University of Ilorin is almost like that, because Ilorin has the largest teak wood farm in Nigeria, but they decided to do this. I mean, I can give you instances around Nigeria. I'm not saying, we've tried to push. When we're pushing. At Third Fund, when I became chairman at Third Fund, I created a line. I don't know whether they are going to continue with that, but created a line for maintenance. I said 6.2% of the entire money that will be sent to a school must be warehoused for maintenance and insurance. And I wasn't doing this to deride the universities that they couldn't manage. I was doing it because repeatedly we had gotten requests for extra budgetary funding to meet fire incidents, meet accidents. At the time, university had the place where they keep their gowns all burnt, so they couldn't convoke. You know,
I'm sorry to interject.
So all of that is attitude.
I'm sorry to interject. This is part of what Prof is talking about, and Professor Salami also said that. And yet, these are institutions where students are being taught insurance.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making.
I'm saying you're teaching insurance, but you cannot insure your own.
God bless you. Now, because the line I made, because we can use even that. The way I structured it was for us to use it to grow an economy. Because, for instance, there are in the 6 geopolitical zones. If we wanted to grow the insurance industry in each of those areas, we will say, for you to insure this place, you need to be headquarters in this zone. Simple. So you grow 6 massive companies at the same time, and you can have the same industry linkages with. There are ways to run the country, the country as a whole, because all of this is because these problems you see in universities, you go to the federal ministry, civil service buildings belonging to government, they treat it the same way. It is the same. You can't go to bathrooms outside your home. You can't go to any. It's wonderful that we're still existing as a country, because in what we learned, and that's why I'm wondering what the universities talk about. They say necessity is the mother of invention. In Nigeria, necessity is government give me. That does not work. In universities, right now, we haven't developed alternates to bitumen. We just came out of council. And part of the argument is, are you saying we can only use what we have been taught? What's the idea behind being a professor? What's the idea of finding new ways? What's the idea? Everything we are using, and people keep repeating that it is about money. Money in the hands of a fool is lost. The problem with money is that you shouldn't let it rule you. Some people ask me why I make an effort to wear made in Kano textile, as cheap as it may be. I said it is an effort. I want to speak to a country that is mine. I want the Aba trader to please go to Kano and get that one. I don't want to be the most fantastic looking GQ made man and running a country in Nigeria. You're disrespecting the country. I think it's an attitude. Nigerians need to understand that this country can't be developed by anybody by contracting. It's not by procurement. We can't continue the procurement mentality. And that procurement mentality is the reason why drains in your village are clogged and nobody wants to. They are waiting for government. Right. Let government award contract. Road pothole will spoil. Nobody will address it in a university. And they will expect that there will be somebody in Abuja whose job it is to know that he is suffering. Your window net is broken in a male hostel. And boys are from the net, they are passing wire in the net that they have broken. And they believe that there is somebody's responsibility to bring them mosquito. It needs to change.
And that is why the VC of Abuja is asking for shared responsibilities, among the stakeholders. So my question will now be, how do we begin to enable this involvement, enable this participation? Do we need to rejig a constitution or legislation to make it binding? How do we begin to activate this process? You brought up this.
Again, government itself must have to realize that it must involve stakeholders, even at the time that it sits down to negotiate with national unions. I mean, when a national union comes to government and you sit down to negotiate with them, do you give them your own conditions? Do you tell them, as a professor, you must produce, and that you must have grants and work with industry, and this salary we're going to give you? What is the need? You are in University of Abuja. What are the issues at the University of Abuja? And therefore, ABC must be done. Do you do that? If you negotiate and all you do is just be on the defensive, well, we want 1 million and you give 1 million. What do I do as Vice Chancellor? I don't have a place. The university does not have a place in the process at the end of the day. The point I'm making is that the stakeholders must be part of all these processes. The goal of parents, they know what they want. Universities has different ambition. It's not even right to expect every university to be the same. We do that here in Nigeria. What is important about universities is usually unique to that university. And universities become excellent in certain area. And therefore you have people from all over the world or all over whatever who want to go to particular university because of some particular reasons. Do we do that in this country? Do we allow a university to just be teaching university, if that is the goal of that university, and allow your university to be exceptional research university, focusing on some areas and certain areas? We have a lot of discussions to make. My own point is that if we continue to talk and feel that, yes, dilapidation, yes, issues that we need, and at the end of the day, we go back to where we've always gone, which is the same status quo. We will never get there.
I just wonder,
when we come back, we're taking a short break.
I know, yeah. I just wanted to underscore the point. I'm not a discussant. Underscore the point that the Vice Chancellor has raised. The Honourable Minister, I think that this is also very valuable. That when there are negotiations with unions, do those negotiations involve all stakeholders? That's one. Second point, does government also place before the negotiators across the table its own slate of demands? That we come, we say we need 1 billion, 1 billion. So they put a gun to the government's head, and the government says schools have been closed for 6 weeks, 6 months. You give it to them. In the meantime, the vice chancellor is an outsider to all of this. The parents and the students are outsiders. The government says, we'll give you 1 billion. There's no demand to say, for this 1 billion, these are the results we expect from your institutions. I think that that's an important point that you may wish to respond to after we come from this break, and also after we take Professor Salami. All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We're Africa's largest television network. We still have all our guests with us. I will return to the Vice Chancellor of the University of Benin, Professor Lilian Salami, in our Benin network studios. Professor Salami, I mean, earlier the Honorable Minister was responding to the question I asked as to how we can alter the parastatal mentality that is often at the heart of the governance of our universities and other tertiary institutions of higher learning. So I'm wondering, what is the role of governing councils? Because from time to time, you see governing councils being constituted, and some persons have sometimes made the observation that, I mean, other than just getting convocation ceremonies and then doing A&P, that is appointments and promotions, there's apparently no role for governing councils. So what exactly can be done and what should be done?
I think beyond what you have just, they play a major role with the supervisory role. And I think most councils, actually, I think it's good the Honorable Minister is here now. We must begin to look at the kind of persons that we put in our governing councils. Governing council members should actually be members that should come and add value to the universities. And so we must begin to look at their pedigree before we send them to tertiary institutions. People who are not, I'll take for instance a vice chancellor who is a professor, or a dean who is a professor, and then somebody who probably has not actually attained that in terms of exposure, the do's and don'ts of the environment, coming in as a member of the council. Sometimes they are not as effective as they should be. So I think we need to also look at, the constitution of council members that we send to tertiary institution. Remember, this is the apex level of the educational structure in this country. That is one. Again, a lot also depends on, they're not resident with the universities. So a lot depends on what they are told and how they are told, how they are told, and how they need to manage the information that they have. So that has also to do with the personality or the person who is at the helms of affairs, that is the vice chancellor. I also want to quickly at this point also mention when the Honorable Minister mentioned something about the maintenance component of the TED fund. You see, there is a regulation that comes with that project can only be used to maintain TED fund projects in the university. TED fund projects in the university, most of them don't need the kind of maintenance that we're talking about here. We're talking about some of those buildings that are 30 years old, 25 years old, that are actually dilapidated and needs some kind of rescue mission. And so when you get such, it comes tied with the fact that you cannot use that to fix these projects. So I think sometimes we need to revisit some of these policies that we put in place so that they become relevant to the universities. And once we do that, then of course we can fully enjoy the gains of setting up an intervention fund such as that of TED fund. I think that is yes.
Exactly, but I just wanted also to raise this point. Listening to both yourself and Professor Nala, I mean, you'll find that questions sometimes have also arisen as to the management of the universities themselves. This time, of course, the Governing Council, we just talked about that. How much systems administration experience do university administrators bring on board? Yes, you've been a head of department, you've been a dean of a faculty, and so on and so forth. But the university is a very complex system. So how much of that ingenuity in terms of systems administration comes in? As you very well know, elsewhere, university administrators themselves don't necessarily have to be in the system. If, say, management of hospitals, you don't have to be a medical doctor to manage a hospital. The healthcare systems that are run efficiently in advanced countries are not necessarily managed by medical doctors. So do we need to do something about this, considering what we used to have in the past, which led to a piece of legislation that Vice Chancellor cannot now do more than 5 years, single term. You know the kind of fight that academics used to have, just to be appointed Vice Chancellor, and then it becomes another chieftaincy title. What can university administrators themselves do to upgrade their administrative skills? And those administrative skills ordinarily should also involve, I would imagine, running a profitable enterprise.
I think basically even for you to become a vice chancellor, I think there are basic rules that are set. Again, this may differ from one university to the other, but there are the basic, benchmarks that such an individual must have attained. Also, you find that before you become a vice chancellor, you must also know that you have to know your terrain. You cannot come to sit as a vice chancellor without really knowing your terrain. So most vice chancellors go through administrative either training or in the lifespan of being a professor in the university. For instance, I even had to step out of the university for a couple of years, where I was the deputy director general of an institute, and then coming back. So a lot of vice chancellors, I think, go through either internally or externally, and then through over the years may have had 1 or 2 or 3 trainings in administrative, management courses. They've taken them here and there. So I don't think, again, we differ. So I cannot use, it's not a case of one shoe fits all, but basically, for you to become a vice chancellor, you must have been tested. You must have been tested, and your pedigree must have been, well known for you to take and gain that position. Again, I use myself. When I ran for this position, we were 29 persons, and then of course I emerged the vice chancellor because I had those added advantage. Having spent over 30-something years in the university, and again stepping out as a director general, I think that added to my, yes, so it is very, very necessary and crucial that for anyone to take the chief executive position in the university, you must be somebody who is very strong in administration. You must be somebody who is very strong in management, because you are dealing with eggheads most of the time. So you need to be able to manage resources, human, material resources, so that you can run your university effectively. So I think that is very necessary, and I know that most vice chancellors actually have this kind of pedigree, that they bring to bear.
VC Abuja, I'm aware, I'm told that in other climes, in other countries where we have some of the best tertiary institutions, where, of course, some of us send our children to, have a mix of funding options, private, public. But, of course, the federal funds, the upper percentage. So you mentioned something about having industries, in your school. Will that be enabling private, participation in the funding of your school?
Yeah, definitely. That's part of it. I mean, industry participation will eventually bring the industry on the table and make them realize that they can put some funding here and there to develop products, to support students, to work with them, even within the campus, to create something, and so on and so forth. I mean, without question, And that is why I keep saying that it's a discussion that we must have. At the end of the day, we must all determine what kind of university education that we think this nation needs. And because of where we want Nigeria to be, we must therefore decide that these are the resources we need, and that those resources must be there. If they must be there, how do we get them there? What are the roles of everybody? And how do we get everybody to do it? I mean, the fact that attitude is not good, industry is not participating, some lecturers don't do stuff, is because we just allow it to happen. If we sit down and we strategize and we decide that we are resolved, I mean, that resolution can get things happening. And some might lead to legislation, some might lead to, change in certain aspects. I mean, we will just define where we want to go, how do we want to get there, and what are the specific activities, what is the role of parents.
How are you getting the confidence of your students? And of course, because when you have such paradigm shift in policies and programs, it's usually met with some form of resistance.
Yes.
So how are you dealing with that?
And in my own situation, I mobilize and I talk to my students regularly. I mean, I communicate with them very regularly, back and forth. They communicate with me also, let them know why there's a change and what the change is about. And sometimes they challenge you, but you just have to have courage to say, this is where we're going, this is our goal, and that is, you must be carried along. And we must remember that students are in the universities to learn and to get better character, to mold their character. It's not all the time that a student just shout A and you are running, to whether or not it's genuine, whether or not there's something we call tough love. I mean, parents just don't allow their children to, simply because they want to go, to put their hand in fire, and they are crying to go there. You say, no, you cannot do that, because I'm your parent and I know what you must do.
All right, Professor Abdul Rashid, thanks a lot. Let's bring in again the Honorable Minister of State for Education. There are a number of issues that the other two discussants have raised. One, of course, we had to pause to go on a short break. Professor Abdul Rashid talks about wider stakeholder involvement during negotiations with unions. That's one. We'd like you to respond to that. Professor Salami also raises a point. Says, look, the federal government, which constitutes the governing councils of universities, must take greater interest in the backgrounds as well as capacity of members of governing councils. Third point she also raises is that there are conditions tied to the TED fund allowances or allocation for maintenance, being specific to TED fund initiated projects, whereas the entire university system needs maintenance. So those three issues, we'd like you to respond to them, plus any other points you may wish to make.
Thank you very much. Again, the education sector, and I don't like talking about Ministry of Education, because education is a lifelong event. It's not just the Ministry of Education event. And if you wanted to discuss all of them holistically, you'd need days. But let's look at the three key things you've just mentioned. TED, and I'll start with TED Fund, because I introduced this as chairman at TED Fund. So the idea was to give the universities some tools to be able to address some of the immediate maintenance issues, even with projects that we have just built. Like the VC just pointed out. What's the point? You just finished building a project and you can't use it. And they tell you it's because water is leaking. And university is saying that they do not have a way to go about that. Two, it still boils down to what I call the attitude of Nigerians. That some place is a parastatal does not make it a parasitic enterprise. Parastatal and parasitism, I know the etymology of the word may connote that kind of sentence, but that does not turn it into a parasite. We may want you to actually begin to work towards helping the system. And that's why we send governing councils. We think through these governing councils before we send them. And you will look at in this the quality we've sent since we came into power, because we're also at odds with some of the quality that was sent earlier. But we've tried to address some of them. And when we inaugurated them, and at the point, even last week, we inaugurated, the Honorable Minister inaugurated another new set of 12. But at the inauguration of the earlier ones, he did explain that yours, we've taken away the power to contract from council and situated that with management. So they are not really involved in contracting, but they have an oversight over governance in the place. Actually, a vice chancellor is a vice chancellor. There's a pro chancellor. Now, but because the vice chancellors control the power of the purse, they now become pro, more or less, because they are now the ones you see, they're the ones who decide, they're the ones who everybody's running to. But there is actually supposed to be a chairman. And more often than not, we shop for chairmen. Some of the vice chairmen we have, some of the pro chancellors we've just had are former vice chancellors. Professor Banigo is now vice chancellor at Ndifu, but he used to vice chancellor a long time ago at Uniport. And in so many respects, some of them are seasoned, either ex-senators, seasoned administrators. We shop. We actually push. In fact, some are reluctant. Some of the people we go to, and they say they don't want to get involved with these shenanigans going on. And we keep begging them, yes, you're a little bit comfortable in your own way, but we will want you to help. And that also translates to what we're trying to do with industry. We're also shopping from the industries. To look at, in Futo, for instance, we have to go and look for somebody who we know is an accomplished engineering person to please come and inject some of your expertise to help we do shopping for that. And I agree with him, because Professor Bogoro, who is at TED Fund currently, is almost hell-bent at making sure that this industry partnership happens. In fact, any tool, Tokbe at the Nigerian Economic Group is resident with him to make sure that this industry linkage happens. And I like what Prof had suggested, and which is what we had said when I inaugurated this team. Professor Bogoro keeps talking about centers of excellence. And I keep saying everywhere can be a center of excellence in relation to what they do well. So find the right material around that. Every industry has where they can the dye industry. Right now, we do not produce shoe polish in Nigeria. There's no industry that produces shoe polish. But this was the subject of the thesis that Kazaure wrote when he the MBTE man today. Why is it impossible to do dye, to produce shoe polish? We need to import it from Malaysia. Which type of country is that? Okay, now, so can we have a research department, and we have chemical department, engineering departments all over.
Industrial chemistry.
They should be producing it as a matter of course. You don't need any, produce what you need. Don't tell me that there is money that you need for this. No. It is not true that you shouldn't experiment with the things you're producing. Normally, university lecturers, I like to engage them on the basis of patent. I don't want you showing me papers you've copied from another person and mapped it. Right. Where's your patent? What is it that you have? And we are engaging. So truly, the Ministry of Education, we can't run everybody's lives. Nigerians have too many laws. Actually, you know, my PhD is actually in law. I'm not the educator. So I know we have way too many laws. The problem is with how Nigerians see the laws. See those laws. Are they for people to obey? Anybody who breaks one law, catch one university lecturer, as we go on strike. One. If you try to discipline just one person, you saw EFCC arrest the former vice chancellor in Akure. Everybody watched that on. This government came in with that zeal. Nigerians do not want to obey the law. No country chases after every citizen. How can you do that? It is our job to police ourselves.
Yeah. Claire, I'm sorry. One other aspect, this is about escaping me. Everybody's talked about stakeholder engagement, and Claire also asked that question. the next challenge will be how to rally the stakeholders to various fora so that these ideas can be further explored, and then you have an item of issues that are implementable. But in terms of fees, I was just wondering, because we keep hearing that, okay, we need to produce people. Universities have a number of programs, shall we say, let me just use this loosely, off-balance sheet programs, for which students are charged tuition, distance learning programs. And those tuition fees are almost similar to what you will find in state-owned universities. So if distance learning students, diploma, and other people can pay tuition, why can't the regular students also pay tuition rather than waiting on the federal government, whose mandate is overwhelming? Who takes that question?
The Honourable Minister.
No, the Honourable Minister should. Yes, because we need to balance between giving access, attaining SDG goals on education, and of course quality.
I don't apologize for that. To really speaking, we ran this our campaign on being a social democratic party. It is my commitment and the commitment of Mr. President and the commitment of all of us that we want to give the most to the poorest of Nigerians. This is making university access. We've licensed private universities for those who can afford it. We've made this available to everyone. We have real problems. We don't have as much problems in the universities as we have in the colleges of education and our polytechnics, where federal government's investments are not being utilized. We want to give total access. I have proposed, and we are still proposing to government, and a bridge version to support the most indigent to attain university, because we need their brains to run the country as well. Most people, and I keep telling people may, yes, people like me may have been privileged. My father used to work in Shell in 1950s, so they discovered oil. So we may have had some traction. But not everybody who has gotten to this point were also just had everything. Government helped bring people along. It takes us £250,000. That's what it costs the British government to train one doctor. Now we train them free. Our problem is that we train them for free, £250,000 on each person, and Britain takes it from us immediately. We produce.
And there are almost 8,000 of them who are there
exactly.
now. So can we continue that financial hemorrhage?
What we need to do is not to stop giving the access. What we need to do is find a way to compensate when we have produced. Let's not rob children of the opportunity. We've already built the universities. We are begging our leaders and the professors, because when we are a vice chancellor, truly speaking, it's just that Nigeria, all good things, Nigerians tend to spoil them. A vice chancellor is a respected office. And they shouldn't turn it into a chieftaincy title, like you pointed out. Please, no, they should help us, because at their level, where they are the experts, we respect them. We want them to please help us bring this together. When somebody is a professor of something, he professes it. He's professorial. Therefore, we should see what it is that he's doing differently. He can't be like one of us.
We can't take any more, because our time is far spent, and I'm sure you've made a point. You've made the point from the perspective of our government, and of course those who are managing the tertiary institutions have also made their point. So the ball is now in your court. You, the viewer, make your own suggestions. But I don't know, Kingsley.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's a matter that, of course, at some point we'll also have to return to, depending on issues that arise from amongst the stakeholders, Vice Chancellor. And I think that universities should also have some peer influence, learn from what others are doing, and not just, I believe, with great respect, that, look, this is my this is my chiefdom, and whatever happens elsewhere is immaterial.
All right, let me appreciate all our guests here, beginning with the Honourable Minister of State for Education, Honourable Chukwuemeka Nwajuba. Thank you very much once again for obliging us your time. And Professor Abdulrasheed Naala, Vice Chancellor of University of Abuja, I would like to appreciate once again. And from our Benin Network Center in Edo State, Professor Lilian Salami, Vice Chancellor of University of Benin. Many thanks to you, Madam, and do have a wonderful day.
For having me here. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Good morning, Nigeria, for today, this Friday, and the last for this week. We'll see you again on Monday by God's grace. I am Claire Adilabo Abdulrazak. Maintain the protocols.
Take personal responsibility, stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.